Hey everyone, Rascal here.
And Mama, welcome to our podcast.
Now we're covering the last movie in the oddly disliked prequel trilogy, Revenge of the Sith.
What? Set 3 years into the Clone Wars, the Jedi rescue Palpatine from Count Dooku. As Obi-Wan pursues a new threat, Anakin acts as a double agent between the Jedi Council and Palpatine and is lured into a sinister plan to rule the galaxy.
Prepare for trouble!
And make it double.
Yeah, this one was definitely probably the darkest one in the prequel trilogy. And we had actually stated, what happened with the Jedi, now the Sith. The Sith are rising, and you kind of see what happened to the Jedi and why it became like a reverse role of that not being many left. It's like, man, this just went on forever, didn't it?
And this also took place 3 years after the second movie. And this one, we actually went to see the movie, but you were little, and I don't know if you remember, but this one actually saw in theaters. Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, I want to ask you, before we even get started talking, what is it you said that is so disliked about this trilogy this particular segment of the trilogy before I even get started, as to why I found it entertaining and liked it?
Well, it's for the trilogy in general, it's a vast number of things, but someone actually did explain a little bit briefly of why, and partially with the last one is because it took the story's too long. It's nearly 3 hours, and half the time nothing happens. The romance between Anakin and Padme is like cringe and annoying. And his dialogue is usually considered like he's not a bad actor, but his lines are awful. Like when he said, my love can't save you, Padme. Only my new powers can. They were like, what did you just say? Like, what did you just say? And like, yeah, some of the dialogue is just like, were you like going to sleep? Because it's kind of off, and yeah, and there's nothing wrong with the effects or the battles, the climax. I still love seeing Yoda kick behind. All that stuff was still praised, but it's just like they had a real problem with just Anakin and Padme and the ship and taking too long. That's what they seem to hate the most.
And we did forget to mention that awesome battle between Yoda and Dooku in the last.
Right, I wasn't
sure. To mention that.
I wasn't sure if it happened in the second movie or the third movie. That's how I wasn't entirely sure.
I thought it happened in the second one. He's the one that kept him from killing him because remember he cut his hand off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So that being said, I like this third movie in this series because I got to find out great details about Anakin and Padme again and how she died willingly because she thought he was dead because they lied to her and told her he was dead. So you know that all of that, Anakin, it wasn't phony and fake. She loved him so much that she didn't even care about the kids.
I guess they said, it was Romeo and Juliet, only horribly wrong.
Right, and they said that, she should have awakened by now. There's no medical reason that she shouldn't be awake. They think she doesn't care. She's lost the will to live. And that's exactly what happened. And then they also lied to Anakin.
Yeah. As
well. And so she's already dead and she wasn't dead. So on both halves, it happened where they were playing one against the other. So we're right. It's a tragic love story. And that was interesting to know that he went fully dark because he thought he lost the love of his wife, and he also thought his children were dead.
Right.
So they both got really screwed over by evil. There's no other way to put it.
Right. And I definitely want to mention that, the bad part, when you get towards the end, it's unfortunately not going to be the best outcome because of what happens in the original trilogy, of course. But when, the Jedi are being taken out, like, consistently, it's not even, like, over a period of time you see them start to dwindle down. I mean, everybody but Yoda and Obi-Wan are gone, and it's like, oh, gosh. And I remember I was going to say in one of the previous podcasts when it said the Council reminded me of Voltron, where they had the original Paladins, and they were, like, the original Defenders. They were, like, the original Council.
Right.
That's what I was going to say, because a lot of people really like having councils that are in charge of it, and regardless of whether they're supposed to be made for good or for evil, that concept of having these people in charge of they all have the similar trait in being in charge, and they kind of make the rules, or be like with Star with the High Commission,
right.
and that pretty much it is inspired from here. So even if this is disliked, lots of bits from these movies are still being used today, like I said, with that.
Absolutely.
And with Palpatine trying to control Anakin and make him go over to the dark side. Like I said, I think that was kind of referenced with Endeavor and Todoroki, but it didn't go on full on like Revenge of the Sith. And it still shows that despite the criticism of the movie and the writing, you can still see there was something stand out about the films, whether good or bad on the viewer. The storyline was still interesting and engaging, and it's something they want to reuse and reference in different works.
Right, absolutely. It was, the ending, of course, was dramatic and epic. And you see him fully becoming Darth Vader. He had done it spiritually and emotionally and mentally, but you physically see him becoming Darth Vader with what happens to his body and the hate that just rises and ensues in that battle where he was fighting Obi-Wan, and he's like, stop,
right.
Don't make me do this to you. Don't make me do this.
You were the chosen one.
Yeah, you can see Obi-Wan is just like, we forgot to mention, forgive me, Ewan McGregor was fantastic as Obi-Wan in all three parts of this. He was fantastic. And I've loved him in other things as well. Most recently, Christopher Robin. He's a fantastic actor.
Yes. And definitely got to mention another one of the antagonists, and that would be General Grievous.
Yes, Grievous.
Grievous, yes. And he's also in the Clone Wars series. And, you know, none of these Star Wars villains are something to be taken lightly. But in terms of the level of danger that each one has, long before Darth Vader, Grievous was pretty high on the list, especially since, you know, it sounded like he was pretty sick, he had the mask on and stuff, but he was still leading the droids and the troops or whatever he had following him.
Right.
He could handle 4 lightsabers at once.
Yes!
And he's pretty iconic just for being really ruthless.
Right.
And even before, you know, like I said, Darth Vader was even in here, he still posed a threat like Darth Maul and Dooku and Palpatine.
Right.
And it just proved that they were just as powerful as the Jedi. Only they're more fueled by rage. Kind of like with the Fire Nation at some point. They were more fueled by rage, and that's part of why they were able to...
Except for Zuko.
Right. That's part of why they were able to kind of wipe them out. Not because they're saying the Jedi were weaker, because they were so fueled by that and wiping them out and wanting to rule the galaxy, of course, that they were able to pretty much wipe them out, minus a few of them that managed to escape.
Right. And it's really, really interesting, as you mentioned in the beginning, in the first podcast of this trilogy, interesting scene in development that led up to really the last 3, which were the first 3. And I found it fascinating that all this had happened, and there's all this story and in-depth explanations and character development. All this went on, having not read, you know, the entire series, just A New Hope.
Right.
So I really found this fascinating, and as you said, it was absolutely beautiful, the sets and the costumes that Padme wore and so forth. And I personally like this trilogy. I think it was great. I would actually sit just like the original 3 and watch this set of 3 all over again. Enjoy. I would watch all 6 of these. Now when you get to the Disney ones,
that one's a little bit, jury is out on that, because at one point you want to watch it, but some of the decisions that Disney or J.J. Abrams decided to take the franchise are very questionable.
Like The Force Awakens, I don't think I could sit through that again.
Right, especially with certain events that happen in there. That
and Rogue
really
One, I would never watch again.
Yeah, with the ending. And unfortunately, that has become the outcome of some of the newer Star Wars movies where after you see them once, most of the time you're most likely not going to see them a second time.
And that's unfortunate because as many a Star Wars fan says, they'll watch the movies over and over and over, but it's only now with the release of these that you're like, I don't want to see this again. It's depressing. I don't like how this turned out. It didn't hold my attention that well. The characters were not that...
I guess engaging.
They're not that engaging
or
well developed.
Yeah, they seem to be
it's
just
different. Really different.
And say what you want about the original trilogy, but still everyone stood out in their roles and their characters just like they did in the original. Mm-hmm. The problem with the new one is that everyone is just kind of standard when they had a big opportunity to be even bigger, and they had lots of great ideas and lots of great potential.
Right.
But when brought to the screen, there seemed to be more of a concern about pleasing different groups and audiences when they didn't even have to do that.
Well, I think the difference in the writing for these is when George Lucas was writing, as I said before, this was his child, his baby. It was written from a place of love. You could tell he loved what he was doing. He loved the characters. He loved the world he created. Now, for the movies that are being released, there's other writers. It's not George Lucas.
Right.
And that love isn't there for the characters, that familiarity, that knowing that comes from it being your intellectual property and creating it. It's not there.
Right.
And that same writing power, that same powerful writing and love for the characters and all that it is does not come through. You feel like it's someone who's taken the mantle and they're trying to be George Lucas and they're trying to make it interesting and they're trying to make a story, whereas with George Lucas he didn't have to try.
Right.
It was his gift from God to make and create this series.
Right. And lastly, I want to mention for the new trilogy is that with J.J. Abrams in charge, we know everyone has their own way of writing, whether they're in charge of their own project or they're taking off from someone else and they're putting in their own stamp. For this one, it seemed like the same standard like when he would do Person of Interest and other movies, where it's sort of like a mystery. They call it a mystery box where things are kind of hinted at and you're not going to find out anything. You got to put it together before the end of the franchise, the end of the series. And the problem is that it's way too vague. It's too vague and they take too long to get some of this stuff and you're not really, into it because the hints are either not worthwhile or they're taking so long to get to them, you forgot which one was supposed to be the hint or the clue to whatever's supposed to be revealed to the end of the movie or the end of the trilogy.
I'm not going to fault J.J. Abrams. He did what he could with what he was given. Again, it wasn't his creation.
Right.
And he wasn't going to handle it the same way. That being said, before the buyout, before they paid George Lucas, and I know how Disney likes to make things their own. Excuse me, guys.
Wait a second.
I know how Disney likes to make things their own. And maybe they didn't want the same style as George Lucas, but the brilliant thing would have been to have George Lucas write the scripts for these final movies, and then they took them and adjusted them to fit the way they wanted, so that way they had the same feel, the same love, the same character development, everything that you're used to having with Star Wars is there, with just a slight change to make it Disney's own. To me, that would have been a great way to go. They didn't. They bought it out, and then they got someone else who had I don't want to say no business, who shouldn't have been writing the scripts,
they didn't fit
because
in.
It wasn't his intellectual property and his creation. It should have been George Lucas who wrote the final scripts for these movies.
Right. So, now we have finally covered the prequel trilogy, and we still stick to our opinion that they were still very good movies.
Absolutely.
They're not perfect, they are flawed, but they are still very fun, entertaining movies.
And pop culture history.
Right.
And movie history?
Yes. Yeah, I guess of cinema history. Yeah,
right,
absolutely.
Absolutely.
So, thank you so much for watching.
Let us know what you think in the comments below of this final installment. If you loved it, if you hated it, and were you really thinking that another trilogy was going to be made or needed to be made after this by anyone? Let us know in the comments below.
Yes. So, I'm Mask Entertainment.
And I'm Mom Entertainment.
Have a fantastic day.
Peace.
Man, who the hell are you? What you wanna do? Well, man, it's on you. Man, it's on you. With her in my dreams, she was my queen. A castle in the mountaintops, rivers and streams. Plucking sunlight from the sky in my pocket. Give it to you later on in the form of a locket.